Racism exists and has profound effects both at the societal level and at the individual level. So today, on Brief Brain Facts, we're continuing our discussion on racism by focusing on the physiological and psychological effects of racism on those who regularly face hate and discrimination on the basis of race. True racism exists only when one group has a disproportionate share of wealth and power over another group, then uses those resources to marginalize, exploit, exclude, and subordinate the weaker group based on race. This definition includes two aspects regarding race-based power dynamics: latent racial bias and subtle racial bias. See our previous video where we go into more detail about these forms of racial biases, as well as the neural processes of these biases performed by the perpetrator. Both bias types may result in severe physiological and psychological effects if you find yourself the target of these biases. In the last video, I described the harmful nature of stereotypes. Stereotypes are used to attribute certain abilities and characteristics to groups, including groups identified by race. When these racial groups are stereotyped negatively, such as being characterized as having low ability, it creates quite the predicament. If a member of the particular racial group fail or underperform in that certain ability, it not only reflects on them as individuals, but it will expand to the stereotyped group. Social psychologists call this predicament stereotype threat. It is the resulting sense that one might be judged or treated in terms of a negative stereotype. Stereotype threat studies have demonstrated that when group membership is made salient or made noticeable, people of that group underperform. For instance, a study examining the effects of stereotype threat simply had Black participants note their race before taking an intelligence test, resulting in underperformance. However, when these participants did not note their race, they performed equal to or better than the white participants. Besides the real-world consequences these intellectual ability tests can and often do have on test takers, other real-world consequences have been noted when stereotype threat was activated. Black patients, when they believed that Black people had higher blood pressure and higher rates of hypertension than their white counterparts, were shown to have higher blood pressure than patients who were not under stereotype threat. According to scientists, the cognitive model of stereotype threat may involve three responses: a physiological stress response, a performance monitoring response, and an emotional regulation response. All of these responses place heavy demand on one's executive functioning, which is a set of cognitive processes necessary for goal-oriented behavior and decision-making. Thus, when active, stereotype threat impacts executive functioning, thereby decreasing or negatively impacting performance. In support of this model, neural evidence has shown that under stereotype threat, the recruitment of areas involved in social feedback and emotional regulation were noted. Specifically, in fMRI studies where participants were under stereotype threat, increased activation of the anterior cingulate cortex and the right orbital gyrus, areas associated with affective regulation and social knowledge, were more active while under stereotype threat. When not under stereotype threat and performing the same ability task, areas associated with cognitive performance and executive functioning, specifically the prefrontal cortex, the left inferior parietal cortex, and the angular gyrus, showed increased activation. Thus, when under stereotype threat, these participants demonstrated a pattern where activity increased in brain areas corresponding with emotional and social processing, but decreased in brain areas associated with cognitive efficiency. A well-documented phenomenon when a target is exposed to either blatant or subtle racial bias is the increased amount of stress produced as a result of these biases. When a target is exposed to these biases on a regular basis due to widespread systemic racism, chronic stress has been observed. Chronic stress has been implicated in many health-related issues, including hypertension, depression, and worsening of pre-existing medical conditions. In addition, chronic stress may result in the loss of neurons in the hippocampus, an area of the brain related to learning and memory. This loss is attributed to the release of cortisol, our stress hormone. When this area of the brain is exposed to cortisol for prolonged periods of time, as is the case when the stress response is activated due to systemic racism and stereotype threat, it may have a toxic effect leading to neuronal death or hippocampal atrophy. One thing to note is that health consequences attributed to racism have been found to be independent of socioeconomic status or financial standing in society. Further, perceived discrimination has been consistently shown to be capable of producing high amounts of stress. Even when controlled controlling for other factors like socioeconomic status. The resulting stress that occurs from everyday instances of racism and stereotype threat is a serious issue that may result in neurological and psychological health consequences. Assuring a healthy society includes eliminating racial biases. A method that seems to show consistent positive results in eliminating prejudices is intergroup contact. This is regular and repeated interactions with members of distinct social groups. In a study examining integrated classrooms where cooperation, common goals, and status equality were emphasized, not only did students' liking for each other improve, but so did morale, self-esteem, and academic performance of the minority group without decreasing the performance of the majority group. While intergroup contact has consistently shown a reduction in prejudices without undermining majority groups, this prejudice reduction approach relies on the availability of others who differ on some dimension in order to form intergroup friendships. The field of social neuroscience is a continuously evolving field that studies all facets of society. As it evolves, scientists are more clearly understanding the social settings within which we live and how they affect our brains. All evidence suggests continued education that leads to the end of negative racial stereotypes will have two effects. First, it will reduce the stress and stereotype-based performance issues people of color face. Second, it will also improve the conditions that create those stereotypes. Living in a better world requires that we work together to end racism, as it affects so many people negatively. Essentially, racism has no place in a society that aims to call itself civil. What other methods do you believe will help address racism? Comment below. If you like what you saw, subscribe to our channel and head over to our Patreon page where we conduct polls on what viewer-requested episode you'd like to see next. Also, make sure to hit that like button, and as always, thank you for watching.